G'day folks, let's talk about trusting AI and trustworthy AI. Before getting into it, I should note that trust is a pretty complex concept. As a phenomena, we have many different ways of attempting to describe and understand it. But because we're using the limits of language or modeling or whatever it may be, we're always grasping at something that's not quite there. So when I define trust today, hold it lightly. It's intended to be practically useful. All right, caveats out of the way, let's dive in. Trust is the willingness to be vulnerable to the actions of another based on positive expectations. Now, this tells us that it's some type of relational phenomenon. It exists between parties at some level. So it can be thought of as being transjective. It requires each party to engage in some type of process. They bring into that process their entire historicity, which includes their propensity to trust. As part of that process, they're trying to establish, hey, are we going in some sort of shared direction here that makes sense? And that's the orientation. Are you going to are you going to do right by me? Are you going to do what you say? Are you good at what you do? I'm trying to assess benevolence, integrity, and competence, right? To set that positive expectation. I've got to accept that there's a lot of uncertainty, right? So even if I go through this process and I have this really positive sort of assessment, stuff could go wrong. I could be harmed. I have to be willing to be vulnerable. Right? I have to be willing to be vulnerable. So there's this real positive intent. Right? Now, some of that is deliberative, right? Like we're consciously engaged in a process, but a bunch of what affords a trust judgment is happening without our awareness. I've gotten into some of the complexities of that in the past. I'm not going to get into that today. So it's only partly deliberative, partly conscious, partly rational. By rational, I don't just mean cold calculation. This involves feeling, affect, intuition, etc., right? When we talk about trusting AI, trusting a sociotechnical system, what do we actually mean? Because the system itself can't be deliberately benevolent, integrous, and normatively competent, because it's designed by people, right? It doesn't have an explicit worldview. It doesn't have a sense of what's real. It doesn't have an ontology. It doesn't have a sense of what can be known. It doesn't have an epistemology. Right? It doesn't have a sense of what to value. It doesn't have an axiology. It doesn't have a moral compass per se, not itself, right? It doesn't have a theory of mind. It can't infer what you're thinking because it knows what it's like to be a being in the process of becoming and pick up on all of these different cues, right, that largely occur at levels of our intelligence that we are not consciously attuned to, right? It doesn't recursively realize relevance. It doesn't care for the world. It doesn't care for you. So this is a very, very different context to an interpersonal relationship or even a person to organization relationship. So when someone says, hey, can you trust AI? what is it that they actually mean? Irrespective of what they mean and whether that's possible, at least at some level, maybe the wrong target for the question. Perhaps a better question is, can you trust the organization that's built the system? Can you trust the system within which, as in the broader system, within which that organization is situated? Right? Our stories, our politics, our economic theories, our incentives, our disincentives, our regulatory regimes, etc. Can you? If so, to what extent? Now that is such a complex context that you have massive epistemological limits as to how quote unquote sort of like rational or logical or deliberative you can be in any attempt to pass a trust judgment. Right, so you may have to sort of like epistemically defer. You may have to defer that trust judgment elsewhere. There are various different ways in which that could be more or less validly done. Let's step away from that for just a moment. Let's talk about trustworthy AI. Trustworthy AI doesn't mean a system is trustworthy per se. It doesn't mean that a system itself is benevolent, integrous, and normatively competent. It doesn't even mean that the organization or the broader system within which the organization is nested is benevolent, integrous, and normatively competent. It doesn't really give you any actual indication into whether you should be willing to be vulnerable to the actions of the other, some fictional other, right, based on positive expectations. Because what it describes is a set of characteristics that a number of groups have deemed normative. So trusting AI, trusting the context within which AI systems have been developed and within which they are used and within which they have impacts, isn't the same as trustworthy AI. Now, hopefully there is some relationship, of course, because systems that exhibit these characteristics that certain groups have deemed normative are more likely to be worthy of our trust in some sort of colloquial sense. But do you get at what I'm getting at? So, whether it's in your personal use or in work that you are doing, maybe you are part of responsible AI, trustworthy AI, AI risk, AI safety, AI governance, or actually doing AI ethics. Step back and have a think about, what do you mean when you say, can I trust this system? What does that mean to you? Is that even like a relevant sort of question? If it's not, where do you start directing the trust? Who has the agency and the moral agency in this situation? Who has the responsibility? Who's responsible for recourse, redress, etc.? Is the system that houses the organization that builds the sociotechnical system, don't lose me, are they capable of encouraging the types of behaviors at the organizational level and system characteristics at the sociotechnical system level that are like properly deemed normative, or are they not? These are the types of questions that we need to be diving deeper into, because so many of us are still going head first into this development and use of these socio-technical systems. And this isn't even getting at the deeper system characteristics and constraints. This isn't really properly alluding to the history, the socio-historical context of AI system development and use. Right? And this doesn't just go back to 57 at Dartmouth. This goes back further. There's a mythology at play here. Right? As you're pondering how to use AI, when to use AI, what sort of systems to develop, which systems not to develop, please consider doing this deeper thinking. Even if only for a moment. Please don't just jump into, okay, well, the government says these are the principles and we've just got to try and enact them in some particular way. Guess what? Enacting principles is hard, right? The purpose of a principle is to be directionally orienting, but flexible, right? So even consistently enacting it's challenging because then it becomes a policy or a procedure or a process or a workflow or a ritual, right? So much to work through here. And I would love to work through some of this with you because I've been doing this work for a long time. And guess what? I got some battle scars. None of us know all the answers. This is super, super challenging territory. Super challenging territory. But if we can bring a little bit of philosophy, if we can enliven ourselves through the process of philosophying, I'm willing to bet that we will be far better placed than ever before to develop the right kind of systems at the right time in the right context that properly serve the whole. And that is a truly normative aim. Bye for now.